Every time you watch a Rollshambo video and you don't hit the like button, a knife with a weak detent is born. Only you can prevent weak detents. Smash like now. How's it going, everybody? I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And I gotta tell you, this knife right here should look familiar because I have already reviewed it. And if you want to see my overview of this knife, link is up there. But today we are, of course, doing something different. For those of you in the know, you know that it's not enough for me to just tell you whether I like a knife or dislike a knife or if I think it's good or bad. I like to give the context to that opinion so that you know exactly how much I like something. This is another episode of Grail or Garbage, the series where I systematically and categorically rank and review knives like this Eikonic Aperture to give you that context, to help you decide, does it deserve a spot in your pocket? Today, we're going to find out. And here's how it works for those of you who haven't seen this before. Grail or Garbage is a ranking leaderboard that is made up of 5 categories. Those categories are materials, ergonomics, fidget factor, the lock, and fit and finish. And this year we're doing something different because we're not just putting every knife on the same leaderboard, we're actually going to separate them into separate leaderboards based on the price range. This knife is under $100, which means that it is going to be on our budget banger leaderboard, the sub $100 knife. Is it a grail or is it garbage? Let's find out. Okay, it's time to rank the Eikonic Aperture. And if you watched my review, you already know that this was designed by Brian Nadeau of Sharp by Design. A designer that's known for making premium knives at premium price tags. So, like me, you might be interested to find out that this is a sub $100 knife. Is the juice worth the squeeze? We are here to find out. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling with the first category, materials. What's it made out of versus the price? Now, we are already talking about the budget banger leaderboard, right? Knives under $100. $100 price range is actually a pretty large price range. And what do you get for your money at the $88 price point? Well, you get burlap micarta, steel liners, D2 blade steel, stamped steel pocket clip, which is stone washed, and of course, ceramic bearings. So, at this price point, I do have to mention that there are plenty of knives that have arguably better blade steel, but I'm going to challenge that thought process real quick. Define better. Are we talking better edge retention? Are we talking better corrosion resistance, better toughness? In some areas, yes. In other areas, no. When heat treated optimally, D2 is actually a pretty decent steel, and many companies still use it. Even custom makers still use D2. So, for those reasons, I'm not necessarily as low on D2 as a lot of people are, and especially when we're talking sub $100. What really matters to me the most is how well it was heat treated. Do I know how well this was heat treated? No, I believe the range on this is between 59 and 61. With that being said, you would have to do some serious testing of your own to find out. And I don't necessarily think that Brian Nadeau would put his name on a design that ended up just being trash. Is that a good reason to bump it points or to take points away? No, I'm just giving you information, the information that I have. But for all of those reasons, I do think that they could have done better on the blade steel. I personally would have loved to have seen 154 cm. I would have also enjoyed CPM D2. I think CPM D2 would have been really, really good for this knife at this price point. However, with regular D2, I've got to say that these are acceptable materials, especially the ceramic bearings. It's going to be getting a 6 out of 10 for materials. Next up, we've got the Ergonomics. Ergonomics is all about how comfortable it fits in your hand, and we also use this time to talk about the pocket clip. Why do we talk about the pocket clip? Because it's really easy to create a pocket clip that works well. However, it creates a hot spot. Now, in this scenario, I'm going to get this out of the way. The pocket clip is actually very well designed as far as the shape. Many people have mentioned that they do not like the stonewash finish on the pocket clip versus the satin finish on the blade. It doesn't bother me. I actually do think that it goes with the brown micarta, but as far as ergonomics are concerned, do you feel the pocket clip? Not really. I mean, it's there, you can tell it's there, but it's not bad. It does have really good jimping here at the top, and here's why I say that jimping is good. It's about the length of your thumb, or an average thumb, and it's not terribly deep. It's also not terribly shallow. It's actually really well designed as far as jimping is concerned. I prefer a saber grip with my thumb resting on the spine of the blade, and that works really well with this jimping. So great job on the jimping. Next up, let's talk about this micarta. This is a burlap micarta, and it's really well done. You'll notice that the edges of that micarta are not sharp at all. They've been really well polished out and chamfered down, so there is no issue with that. The burlap micarta feels really good in the hand. Now, this knife is a little bit on the smaller side. I can still get a full 4-finger grip, no problem. Is it the best 4-finger grip ever? No. I do actually wish that this knife was about maybe a 1/4 inch longer. Had this been a 1/4 inch longer, that would actually have been perfect, in my opinion. I have large size gloved hands. You know, when I get gloves, I get large size and they fit. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I do feel like this knife could have had handle skills just a tiny bit longer and it would have been perfect. As it stands, the ergonomics on here are still good. You can, in fact, do a reverse grip, and it works rather well in this reverse grip. Aside from the length of the handle skills being ever so short, in my opinion, it still is very comfortable in the hands due to that micarta and just how well chamfered and manufactured that is. Something else that I have to bring up is that the liners on here are crowned all the way around. Anywhere your hand touches is crowned. That's fantastic. That extra attention to detail really does help this get over the hump and feel a bit more premium than other knives in this price range. Most knives in this price range are not going to crown the edges of the liners, but this one does, and I think that it's worth mentioning. For those reasons, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 7 out of 10 for ergonomics. All right, it's time to talk about Fidget Factor, and I love talking about Fidget Factor because I get to talk about things like the action, the detent. How easy is it to engage and disengage on deployment? How snappy is it? You know, these things have nothing to do with how many deployment options the knife has. Fidget Factor has everything to do with how enjoyable is it to use. And it's crazy to me that I can say Fidget Factor and I can give you that explanation, but I'll still get 10 people in the comment section saying, well, it's only got one deployment option, or I don't care how many deployment options it has. Guys, I promise you that is not what Fidget Factor is about as far as this ranking is concerned. And it's probably a good thing for this knife too, since it only has one deployment option. Now, that option is a flipper tab. And on this one, I do have a little bit of a gripe. The gripe is that we have no jimping on that flipper tab. None whatsoever, and we could have used, at the very least, a little bit. I'm not talking about super harsh jimping or even jimping as deep as what we get on the spine of the blade here, but just a little bit. That a little bit of extra grip would have made it easier to deploy. However, that does point towards the reason I'm mentioning this. This knife has an excellent detent. Brian Nadeau, if you didn't know, he specializes in really good detents. And while this one does not have his proprietary detent, I'm assuming he saves that for his much more expensive knives, it does have a really well-tuned detent. Because of that, the lack of jimping on the flipper tab is more noticeable. Now, is it something that's hard to overcome? No. Due to the ceramic bearings on here, I haven't been able to fail the deployment once without intentionally putting my hand in the way and stopping it from deploying. The lightest I can press this and get it to deploy, it will deploy all the way. I can try to deploy it really, really slowly and lightly. That's great. That is a mix of the ceramic bearings and a really decently tuned detent. And finally, engaging and disengaging when you do deploy it is not bad because, again, the liners are crowned and that lock bar is chamfered and dimpled. That's a little bit of extra detail that a lot of people aren't going to pay attention to. If you're one of those people who glossed over the moment you saw D2, I totally get it. But there's a lot of small, fine details on here that are easily missed. Like, for example, that backspacer. Should have mentioned that in the materials. Oh well. Anyways, the Fidget Factor on here is really good because of how well tuned it is. The detent is good. The action is good. This is going to be getting an 8 out of 10 for Fidget Factor. Next up, we have the lock, and we've already touched on it lightly. It's a liner lock, and the lock itself is, it's a liner lock. It's not really a heavy-duty lock, but it doesn't have to be. The lockup is perfect, honestly. We're sitting right there at about 23 to 25% on the engagement, and that lock is solid. There is no play. There is no pivot lash, and the detent pops it in perfectly. There's not a whole lot else I can say. It's a liner lock. If you're okay with liner locks, it's about as good as liner locks get. And I'm really, really satisfied with that lockup. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it. Good job on the lock bar. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10 for the lock. Guys, and finally, we're at the last category. It's fit and finish. Fit and finish is 1 part manufacturing and 1 part design. So let's start off with that first. The manufacturing on here is excellent. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure who the OEM is or if Eikonic is their own OEM. It's very possible, and if you know the answer to that question, make sure to list it in the comment section down below for those like me who don't know. I like how all the edges are perfectly knocked down, and more than that, they're kind of chamfered over. That's accentuated by how crowned these liners are, which it just tickles me because you rarely see it all the way around on the liners. Anywhere that your hand could touch a liner, it's crowned. And that's great. I love seeing that, and I wish we would see that on more knives. I also really enjoy the fact that we're not bombarded by body screws. You want to see a body screw? There it is, 1. And then the pivot, and then the 2 pocket clip screws. That's about as minimalist as you can get. They said, oh, you want them to mill out the liners to make it lighter? No worries. Check this out. We'll just put a hole through the entire thing and it will look good. And it looks great. But now we're getting into the design part. So is the Brian Nadeau design something that is noticeable? Is it something that makes a difference, or would we have been fine with an in-house design? Honestly, I can tell that Brian Nadeau put his signature on here because the detent is perfect. And also little details like the crowning of the liners and the polishing over of that burlap micarta really do show an extra attention to detail that in-house designs just don't show. I think that it's absolutely worth mentioning. Am I nuts about this cutout that goes all the way through? No, it's an aesthetic thing and it does relieve some weight, but I would have been fine had that been a full handle scale. This burlap micarta is really, really comfortable in the hand, and so I actually would have liked it if it had been a full handle, but then it wouldn't have been called the Aperture. It would have been called something like a Mini Evo Typhoon or something. I digress. The overall design for a sub $100 knife is good. It's very, very laudable. And I think that when people are making this value proposition to themselves as to whether or not it's worth the money, it's going to come down to how much you like or dislike D2. And I'll say it again one more time for the people in the back who didn't hear it. D2 can actually be a really decent blade steel if it's properly heat treated. If it's not, then it kind of earns its reputation that it's gotten over time when cheap companies have done cheap heat treats because they don't want to wear out the machinery in their shop when they mill it. And I've said my piece, guys. I think that this is a great design. I think that the attention to detail really shows, and you're not going to get that attention to detail in mini knives in the sub $100 price point. For all of those reasons, it's going to be getting an 8 out of 10 for fit and finish. So let's go ahead and add up all the scores. For materials, it got a 6. For ergos, it got a 7. For Fidget Factor, it was an 8. The lock was a 7. And then finally, fit and finish was also an 8. Now, if you add up all of those scores, you will get a grand total of 36. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, what do you do now? It's tied with the same score as the Tempest Pinion. How are you going to put it on the leaderboard below or above it with the same score? Easy. I'm going to decide which one I think is the better value. And honestly, the Tempest Pinion is a really, really good knife designed by Casey from Knives Fast. And he does use, in my opinion, a better steel. And it's also a few bucks cheaper. So for those reasons, I am going to give it the same score as the Tempest Pinion, but I am going to give the Pinion the edge on the leaderboard specifically. 36 out of 50 is what I call a high recommend. Could I recommend this? Absolutely. The difference between an in-house design on a knife and a knife designed by a premium designer like Brian Nadeau lies in the details. And if you're willing to look for them, you will find them on this knife. It is very well finished. There are very few things that I can complain about on here, and ultimately I do think that it's a good design. With that being said, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section down below. And guys, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, boo-hoo, you know what to do. And if you want to see more knife rankings and knife reviews, make sure you hit subscribe and smash that notification bell. I'm Rollshambo. I'll catch you on the flip side.